Donald Trump's Putin summit has obviously yielded one of the most criticized weeks of his presidency. That's sure to bother a media-obsessed leader. But there are reports Trump thought he did well initially on Monday, and then his advisors and this ensuing media coverage moved him to walk back some of the statements. Now, a lot of that we know. This week also marks something else, though. The most high-profile Trump diplomacy, this big mission, since he has added someone to his team, former Fox News president Bill Shine. Fox was ground zero for hearing from the key players at the summit this week. Note, both Trump and Putin went there for their first interviews, and that means they entered an environment where the voices were largely pro-summit or undercutting what was a lot of the rest of America's public criticism of that Helsinki press conference.
All this hysteria about this press conference. The president said, look, I could have said it better, I should have said this, and they act like it's the apocalypse. It's not.
You have just witnessed the single worst 24 hours in the history of your mainstream media.
I think, of course, they try to interfere in our affairs. They have for a long time. Many countries do, some more successfully than Russia, like Mexico, which is routinely interfering in our elections.
But what was he supposed to do? Take a gun out and shoot Putin?
No.
Fox, of course, has long been a politically conservative network, but it has also become more about Trump and less about consistent conservative policies in this era, which has boosted ratings, which may explain why Trump basically has a week that's been so bad that when it can't even be ignored on Fox, the Fox story turns to bashing the messenger.
If you believe the explanation that he misspoke, which is historic. He's never admitted he's made a mistake or misspoke, ever.
Ever since the president misspoke on Monday at the Helsinki summit, the media have spun around like whirling dervishes.
The media. Here's one problem, though, for that argument for Fox. It's starting to kind of become a circular firing squad because we're looking into this, and we've noticed there are some people on Fox, a.k.a. conservative media, if that's what they want to be called, who also criticized Trump's Putin embrace this week, or at least quoted other conservatives who did that.
This was the time and the place for the president to look Putin squarely in the eye and said, you will be punished for what you did in 2016.
But he didn't. And that's what made it disgusting. That's what made his performance disgusting.
When Newt Gingrich, when General Jack Keane, when Matt Schlapp say the president fell short and made our intelligence apparatus look bad, I think it's time to pay attention.
Time to pay attention. I'm joined by Mara Gay and Sam Seder, as well as Julius Krein, editor of the American Affairs Journal. He's a conservative writer who was a Trump supporter but has publicly broken with the president initially after Charlottesville, which he wrote about in the New York Times. Thanks to each of you. Sam, you're a longtime Fox watcher. What do you think of this problem just displayed in those clips, where if this is a bad thing to criticize the president, a lot of that's happening inside of Fox as well?
Yeah, well, first off, let me just say this, that you know, they were a Republican mouthpiece at least 10, 15 years ago. I mean, there was a reason why at one point the Obama administration tried to push them into the back of the White House press pool. But so what they're doing now, they're just sort of hewing to form by supporting the president in the way that they're doing. I don't think it's that big. I mean, I think that, you know, some people didn't get the memo early enough in the day, and by you know, the next day he's misspoken. And I think you'll see them congeal. But
well, I would push back a little bit. There were examples previously, for example, the Harriet Miers Supreme Court nomination, where you're right, they would be pro-Republican, but then there was a kind of a set of ideas that they were willing to prosecute or use against even Republicans, which they argued at the time meant they were more independent. What we're seeing now is, no matter how extreme it is,
there's no daylight.
No matter how extreme it is, they are, to your point, they're then also saying, well, we got to back them up no matter what.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to a certain extent, they're fully integrated with the president. You know, I've said this before. Sean Hannity, you know, he's the second or third most powerful man in the country right now. I mean, he has the presidency ear on a regular basis. Bill Shine is sitting in the White House. Trump has pulled a significant part of his administration just off the airways from there. And so I think, you know, there's a lot less daylight. I think these conservative voices, I think they're going to go away. I honestly think they're all going to end up rallying behind the president until the next thing.
So you mentioned that. Julius, you are one of those conservative voices. Your view?
Well, I think aside from the usual political posturing and positions changing with short-term interests, which I doubt surprises anyone at this point. There's also maybe more substantively the split in the Republican Party, the conservative movement around foreign policy. The party, has changed. It's not nearly as enthusiastic about aggressive democracy promotion rhetoric and so on than it was during the Bush years. And that
let's get serious.
Throughout the conservative party and Fox News.
Let me jump in and then I'll let you respond.
Julius, that shift.
Let me jump in. If Barack Obama did 10% of what Donald Trump did on Russia this week, everyone would be on fire, right?
Well, I remember when Barack Obama said during the debate when Romney said Russia was the biggest threat, the 80s called and they want their foreign policy back. And all the Republicans blew up and exploded, and this was supposed to be a massive controversy. And now the situation's different, and of course they shift. And like I said, that's not surprising. But if there's anything more substantive, it's that there's a significant divide in the conservative movement that's reflected on Fox News related to the foreign policy approach in general.
I just have to say that it's a great time to have a conversation about the difference between journalism and entertainment. And I think one of the more embarrassing things for Fox News is, this is not a partisan issue. It's not an ideological issue. But the way Fox News on the whole has kind of followed the thought of Republican members of Congress who are to the far right, and also just of where they assume their audience is, which is, really in Trump's base, is just, I think, a disservice, frankly, to viewers and to Americans. I mean, if you say you are a news outlet, then you have to hold yourself to a certain standard, not because that's the law, but because that's what our democracy requires. They are not upholding their end of the bargain. And I think the longer they go on saying that they are a legitimate news outlet, but they're unwilling to actually tell their audience what the audience may not want to hear, the more dangerous it is for our democracy.
And do you think there's a possibility politically that people who are conservative or generally pro-Trump still don't really get, or want to think through what has now been 4 consecutive days of either inexplicable or only explained by really bad reasons sucking up to Putin?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like acrobatics every day. Oh, the double negative, this and that. It would not, my mother is a 6th grade teacher. It would not pass muster for a 6th grader to come in and say, the dog ate my homework. Oh, no, it wasn't the dog, it was the cat. It's ridiculous. But of course, this is a lie within a lie at this point. So.
Right. So Julius, as someone who voted for Trump but has publicly reckoned with that, do you think this was a mistake of a week for him on foreign policy?
I don't think it will be all that significant. I think probably, he scored some cheap political points with his own base. He's let his opponents score some cheap political points against him. Ultimately,
let me refine my question, because I'm not asking politics. Do you think this was good or bad for American national security this week?
I think it was of relatively little importance. I think the actions matter a lot more than any press conference. And since Trump's been elected, we've put more sanctions on Russia.
Let me hit you on that. I mean, the actions are reports in Bloomberg today that Putin's telling people that he's got a secret Ukrainian deal that Trump's considering. He's getting a level of engagement that Republicans and conservatives have long said is problematic for murderous tyrants who aren't held accountable. That we saw that in North Korea, we saw that here, we see that with the White House invite tonight. So even by the sort of national interest sort of approach, there's more than talk. It's actions that seem to be embracing him. And again, there's no push for extradition on people that the U.S. government has indicted for cyber attacks relating to the integrity of our democracy. So does any of that, I guess, concern you? Or are you maybe going back into the Trump re-election camp?
Since Trump's been in office, we've imposed more sanctions on Russia despite objections from NATO allies like Germany and Austria. We've started selling offensive.
You're referring to the congressionally mandated sanctions that Donald Trump called unconstitutional?
We've started selling offensive weapons to the Ukrainians.
You have to answer my point, though.
I'm open-minded about what happens next, and I'll evaluate it. But at this point, I don't see a lot more than rhetoric that can be criticized.
Just evaluate the first point. On this show, we respond to each other substantively.
A deal on Ukraine would be useful.
Why would you give the administration credit for sanctions if it opposed?
It didn't oppose them. They're in place.
No, it was passed by Congress, which is how laws are passed, but they
didn't
opposed
veto them.
They opposed them and said they were unconstitutional.
They did not veto them. They're in place.
Sam?
Well, I would also add that from a national security standpoint, we have allies. I think it would be irrational at this point for the leaders involved in NATO to be sharing intelligence with the U.S. government or with parts of it when our own director of national intelligence is out there basically with his hair on fire saying what just went down was completely out of bounds. And I mean, in public. I mean, this is, we can ignore this guy who is a longtime Republican appointed by the president, but he's doing this with I think it's a very conscious act, and I think we have to ask why. And some people aren't obviously impressed by that at all, but I think that's somewhat problematic. And you got to think about our allies. I just think that they're going to be freaking out a little bit.
Do you want to close this out on a final depressing note of any kind?
I just think it's a really important time for Congress to step up and to keep the pressure on Donald Trump. What tends to happen is that he gets a news cycle where he's gone too far, he's crossed a line, and then everything goes back to normal. This is not normal.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.